Just let me start with the bare facts. 65 million people displaced from their homes by conflict or persecution in the world today. Not economic migrants, people who are choosing to leave their home and their country in order to seek economic betterment. There are about 250 million of those. These 65 million people are homeless because of war or persecution. Of that 65 million, 40 million are still within their own home country. So they're what's called internally displaced. So 7 million Syrians have been bombed or driven out of their homes, but they're still living within Syria. In northeast Nigeria, 2 million people have been displaced from their homes by the Boko Haram terrorist group, but they're still within Nigeria. So 40 million internally displaced. About 25 million are refugees. I mean, absolutely technically, 22.5 million are refugees and 3 million are asylum seekers. But just keep in your head that 25 million people of the 65 million are people who have been driven from their homes by conflict or persecution, and they've gone into a neighboring country. And the definition of a refugee is someone who has a well-founded fear of persecution. In other words, they don't feel safe to go home, and they're judged not to be safe to go home. One danger of this crisis, and one idea behind the book, is that 65 million feels like a dehumanized number. It's almost so big that it can't be comprehended. It's actually 1 in every 110 people on the planet. So it's a population. It would be the 21st largest country in the world if it was a country. There are characteristics of these people, though, that I think are important to understand. One is that half of these people are under the age of 18. So half of the world's refugees are children. We'll come back to what that means for some of the argument about refugee resettlement, because if you think about the debate about Syrian refugees arriving in the US, fully 47% of the Syrians who've been allowed to come to the US are actually kids. But one characteristic is that they're children. A second characteristic that's very important about the displaced population is that they're displaced for a long time. I mean, many of us, my own family, there'll be other people in this room who have family heritage of displacement during the Second World War, and the displacement was for a limited period of time. Those who survived. My mother was a refugee from Poland in 1945. My dad was a refugee from Belgium in 1940 to the UK. Today, the average length of displacement is 10 years. And once you've been a refugee for 5 years, the average goes up to 21 years. So essentially, we're talking about not just a large scale of displacement, 65 million people, 25 million refugees, we're also talking about long-term displacement. Third characteristic that I think is incredibly important, half are kids, 10-year average displacement. 60% of refugees live in urban areas, not in camps. Many of us will have, if I got $10 every time I'm asked, what do you work in camps? I'd be a rich man. The truth is that most refugees are not in camps. 60% of refugees are in urban areas. So the challenge for them is different than in a camp setting. In a camp, you're pretty much guaranteed food, and if you're really sick, you'll get some health care. In an urban setting, you're not guaranteed that kind of food delivery or the health delivery either. So we've got an urbanized displaced population, as well as a young displaced population, as well as a long-term displaced population.